But what they had done is secretly a bunch of the staff members had planned together. And what they had planned was they planned to kill the family. They decided this is what they're going to do. They're going to kill my dad and my mom and everybody, and then they would take over the business. So I think the best thing for us to do here, everyone, is to simply jump right into it. I'm going to play in the background just some footage that a friend of mine took in Cape Town. Now, Cape Town is where I was born, and I grew up in Cape Town. When I was 10 years old, we moved to Johannesburg. It was a massive shift for me, and of course, the two places are diametrically opposed, very different. Cape Town, as you can see, is a very beautiful place, stunningly beautiful, full of vineyards and the sea, and it's a gorgeous place. It is also the only place in South Africa that I would ever suggest anyone visit if you were planning on going to South Africa, and the reason being it is probably still the safest place in South Africa. And the reason for that is the political party that has the majority rule in Cape Town is the Democratic Alliance. They are the opposition party to the African National Congress, the ANC that you all know. The ANC, of course, is the one that was led by Nelson Mandela. And unfortunately, the ANC is a communist party. Its roots are in communism, and it's, well, very thinly veiled, but it is communist, and all of the members are communist, and they just want to destroy the country and turn it into a communist hellhole like every other communist hellhole in the past. So up in Johannesburg and Durban and so on, you are unfortunately under the ANC majority rule, and so you can see the differences. Anyway, that aside, you can see the beautiful scenery here, some of the along the wine route and so on. I just want to thank my friend Nathan for taking this footage. He took it in about 2017 or 2018. He was going to visit family, and I asked him to take a bunch of B-roll for me of South Africa so I could use it. So all the footage you're going to see in the background is going to be of Cape Town, which I must once again reiterate is still the best part of South Africa. They call it the last deck of the Titanic because, you know, as the country's kind of regressed and the troubles started, Cape Town has always kind of been a fairly reasonable place to go and stay. So I grew up in Cape Town, then we moved up to Johannesburg, completely different place. Johannesburg was always like the financial capital of South Africa. South Africa has 3 different capitals. It's very confusing. You've got Cape Town as, I don't know, some kind of capital, Pretoria, and Johannesburg. One is like a financial capital, one is a legislative capital, something like that. It's a bit of a weird mess. And when we moved up to Johannesburg, it was, of course, a big shock to me. Everything changed, my lifestyle changed, and we moved to a small holding, which is, it's kind of like a plot, okay? So a piece of land, which was a couple of acres big, and it was outside of the city, far away from any kind of shopping malls or any kind of built-up areas. When we first moved there, it has changed over the years. And so we lived, at least I lived a kind of a fairly isolated lifestyle. And by isolated, I mean I would be either at home or I would be at school, and nothing really in between. I didn't go out much because everything was far away, and it was too much of a hassle for my parents to drive me into, say, a shopping mall and come pick me up and so on after work and so on. So I pretty much became very introverted during that time. I really sunk myself into my obsession with computers and technology. And I do have a very solid IT background, and I do have a lot of IT qualifications and things like that. But that's something that I did, was I used to explore around the bush, and later on I did get a motorbike and start to ride around the bush on a motorcycle, you know, and that's how I used to get out and so on. But I would like to tell you about that one day, because this changed everything. Growing up in South Africa during the transition period from the previous apartheid days to, I'd say, integration and changing everything over, you know, was a very interesting time. The high school that I went to was the first integrated high school ever in South Africa. It was called Woodmead High. And it had, even before apartheid ended and stuff, they had, sort of, it didn't matter what race you were, you could go there type thing. It was a very nice place, the high school. And I remember in primary school quite clearly when things changed when I was very young. And I think I must have been like, what was I? So around about 12 or so when things changed and, black children came to the school and joined. And it was all very natural. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't weird or anything to us. That's just how it was. I think it was, I can't even remember my age. But I was very young when that happened. Of course, the ANC won the elections in 1994 and things really changed after that. And what happened now, what I'm going to tell you in the story, happened after the fall of apartheid and after Nelson Mandela was in power. So what happened was, it was a Monday morning. Just going to get straight into the story. If you want to know any more background, you can ask me questions later. It was a Monday morning and I was feeling very sick. And I know a lot of kids, when they don't want to go to school on a Monday, they'll try to make up excuses for not going. But I was legitimately sick and I didn't want to go to school. But for whatever reason, my mom forced me to go to school. So I was like, okay, fine. I was at school. Everything was, fine. But then something strange happened. Instead of my mother coming to pick me up after school, she used to come pick me up, my uncle came and fetched me from school, after school. Now, I don't want to talk a lot about my uncle because he's a very secretive person and he's not somebody who likes to be talked about. But I can tell you that my uncle is pretty decorated in the military and he has a background in the special forces. And I'm not making this crap up, it's the truth. And he's, like I said, he's very cagey about these kind of things. So that's pretty much all I'm going to mention about him, really, because I don't want to, upset him or anything. So my uncle came and fetched me from school. And I thought this was very strange, considering I hadn't seen him for a very long time. And he just told me that something had happened at the house. And on the way back, he pretty much told me what had been going on. And if you've watched the previous interviews of my mother and my father, you'll know what happened from their point of view. But a quick recap for those of you who may have missed those. My father still runs a construction company. What he does, so it's more like a landscaping and construction company, but what he does is he specializes in building water features, dams, koi ponds, that kind of thing. So, if you need a big dam on your property or you want a trout stream or a koi pond or whatever, he comes in and he can do the landscaping and anything related to that. Okay? And when I was young, when I was, I think, starting at the age of 13 or 14, he would, during my holidays or when I wasn't at school on the weekends and stuff, he would hire me to go on site and just kind of help. That was his way of, I suppose, giving me some experience and allowing me to earn some money. So he would put me on site and I'd work along with the laborers and, the typical day would be we'd get on site in the morning and we'd start working, digging holes and, mixing cement and doing all that kind of thing. And I enjoyed the physical labor. I actually enjoyed the work. It was something that feels quite rewarding, So we'd work during the day and then afterwards, of course, we'd all sit and have lunch together. I've got a lot of very interesting stories. I'll just tell you one of them quickly. There's this food that a lot of the black guys like a lot. It's called, what's it called? It's like Pilchards. I think Pilchards or anchovies. It's anchovies in a tin. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me now. So, something like star anchovies or something, but whatever. And it comes in this tin. And the tin has like a pink label around it. You get a very spicy version of it. And I remember we were all sitting around for lunch. And one of them had bought this tin. And we wanted to cook it. Everyone wanted to eat it. But we didn't have a can opener. So it's in this can, it's in a tin can. So one of them decides, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it on the ground and we're going to try and open it with a pickaxe. Okay, but very gently. So everyone's kind of, including myself, we're all crouching over this tin of this spicy Pilchards, and this guy's tapping away with the end of a pickaxe to try and make a hole in it, and then at least you can try to open it up. He's tapping away. And finally, it gives way, but it created a massive splash, and it splashed this like chili Pilchard or anchovy, whatever, liquid into everybody's eyes, because we were looking at this, right? And everyone was like, had chili in their eyes and rolling around in pain. It was an interesting situation. I had a lot of these fun little adventures when I was on site, working with the men, because these guys were all much older than me, but we all got along very well. But there was one guy who was a little dodgy. I mean, there were quite a few guys that were dodgy, to be honest. And some of the stories are just hilarious. Like there was a guy called Solly, and he came to work one day and he was limping and his foot was in a bandage. And I asked him what had happened to him, and the other guys told me that he got so drunk that he slept with his foot in the campfire and it like burned half his foot off or whatever, that kind of thing. It was just a really interesting bunch of guys. But one guy was a little bit dodgy, and his name was Shadrach. And the reason I say he's a bit dodgy is I remember, and I was 14 years old at the time, and I was working with a guy. And I remember at the end of the day, everybody would kind of wash themselves off and usually use a garden hose, or, at the dams or the lakes that we were walking on, you just go do a kind of a splash, do a what we used to call a Portuguese shower, just take a little bit of water, rub it under your arms and, on your face, that kind of thing. So this guy he took off his shirt one day to like wipe down, and he had a lot of knife wounds, like healed knife wounds, and he had some prison tattoos and stuff. And the prison tattoos you get in South Africa, a lot of the guys had these tattoos actually. Usually they like they like to tattoo like an AK-47, or they tattoo a knife, or they tattoo something, but it's very badly done. It's like someone, I don't know how they get it done in the prisons there. I guess someone takes some lead out of a pencil or something, and they do, they kind of hand draw it, but it's drawn very badly, like a kindergartner type thing. They had a lot of these. And I remember I'm pretty sure I told my old man about it, that this guy looked a bit dodgy, but whatever the case, what had happened was, it was this guy, Shadrach, and a friend of his from one of the townships had planned to do a home invasion at my house. And they did. They came in, and if you heard the story, they roughed my mother up and the secretary. They put them in the trunk of a car, tried to drive away with them, but the car wouldn't start. Sexually molested my mother, tried to rape her, but, everything just worked out that didn't happen. And they tried to shoot my mother, and because they didn't know how a revolver works, it was just all luck. Because the live round, he'd put the live round behind the hammer, and when you cock a revolver, it shifts the cylinder over, and there happened to be two spent rounds. And so when he pulled the trigger, it hit one of the spent rounds, and so it didn't go off. So he almost killed my mother, and him and his partner were waiting to kill my father when he walked in the door. But just luck would have it that my dad had forgotten to check the fish or something and walked around the corner, and he wasn't shot. And finally, when my dad caught up to one of the guys, when he found out what was happening, he didn't have a gun on him at the time. My dog, Napoleon, attacked the guy and saved my dad's life. What happened after that, I might tell all of you a little bit, but let's just say that they caught one of the guys. The other guy never was caught. Turns out he was probably a police informant, and he never saw justice. One of them got 15 years. Shadrach, he got 15 years in jail at the end of all of this, but surprisingly. Now, the whole title of this video, that I was almost murdered, is 100% if I had stayed in the house that morning and this home invasion had gone down, I would have tried to do something. And in trying to do something, I definitely would have been murdered by these guys. There are a couple of things that I'd done prior to that as well. It doesn't matter how young I was, but I remember one night specifically, my dad went fishing down at the river, and he would go sit there. My dad was a very avid fisherman, and we had a river on the property. He'd go down to the more what can you say, the rougher, more natural part of the river down, where there's a whole bunch of trees and bamboo and whatnot. And to get down there, you know, you kind of have to walk through a bush path. And he goes sit there and I guess fish and drink whiskey or whatever he is doing down there. And I heard gunshots coming from that part of the property. And so I grabbed my pellet gun. I had one of those break barrel pellet guns. And so I grabbed my pellet gun and I went kind of crawling through the bush trying to see what was going on there. And I remember I was going through the bush down there near, and I just heard from in the bushes my dad say, "Hey." And he was there. He was hiding in the bush because he was hiding from whoever was shooting at him. And at the end of the day, we figured out that what had happened was one of the neighbors was either doing some target practice or something and was just shooting over the river, but happened to be shooting in the direction of where my dad was and over his head. So, I mean, I'm just using that as an example of when I was at that age, and still now, if you've heard about my stories in China and stuff, I don't stand by when someone's in trouble. And because my mother was in trouble and being roughed up, and the secretary as well, I 100% would have done anything I could to attack those guys. And they were armed, and I was a little boy, and I would have been murdered. So I barely escaped that. There have been a couple of times in my life where I have narrowly escaped death in South Africa. A lot of the times my fault, you know, because when you're young and stupid and full of vigor, you know, you get yourself into certain situations that you shouldn't. And I'm sure I can find some time to tell you more of those stories in the future. But anyway, I got home and it was pretty devastating to see the state that my mother was in. And there was a whole big buzz because, you know, we had a whole bunch of people over at the property police and all that busy trying to figure things out. And things were never the same again from that point on when it comes to the way we lived, really. And remember, this was when apartheid had just finished. Like, to be honest, it had been over for a number of years before 1994. You know, the build up to 1994 had been phased out, but 1994 was the official, now the ANC rules the country type thing. But everybody had embraced it with the idea that we were going to work together for a bright future of South Africa. And that unfortunately let a lot of people lower their guard, and a lot of bad things happened. And after people started to realize that things were not going to actually be that positive and great, it changed the way people lived. And you started to see people constructing like a prison around their house. Barbed wire, electric fences, you know, security infrared beams in case anyone walks, you know, everybody's armed to the teeth. It was a different kind of a time. And there was a lot of bad things that happened during those times, and a lot of bad things that happen today. In fact, South Africa's in a far worse place now under the leadership of the ANC than it ever was in the past. And a lot of people confuse that. They confuse that with the idea that by saying something like that I support apartheid or the apartheid government, and I don't. I don't support apartheid, and I don't support the apartheid government in any way, shape, or form. But I also don't support the ANC, who are a bunch of corrupt communists who've destroyed the country. They had the opportunity to take what was there and build South Africa into something beautiful. And what they did was they took what was there and destroyed it. Stole all the money out of the Reserve Bank and the coffers and everything like that. Set up all this corruption, tenderpreneurship, all this kind of nonsense. Stole everything and put nothing back. And what we see now is the rape capital of the world, the AIDS infection capital of the world, and as far as I'm concerned, the crime capital of the world. We see ethnic minorities being persecuted, and it's just not a good place anymore. So, like I said, things changed. I started to carry a gun from the age of 16. Okay, I got a picture here I can show you of when I was about 20, I guess. Well, let me try and see. Let me find the pictures. I'll show you here. I gotta just see. There we go. Sorry, not that one. That's me when I was about 19 or 18, I guess. I've still got that same jacket. That's the one I wore for conquering southern China and all that, by the way. That's me when I was 2 years old in Cape Town with a snake. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. There I am, 20, 21. You can see there I am with my 9mm that I carried with me always, drinking a beer, because that's the most responsible thing you can do when you're armed, is drink. Just kidding. There I am again. You can see I'm... Wait, there. Sorry. There you can see I'm carrying my gun. I never... For the entire time I lived in South Africa, I was never without a gun from the age of 16. I carried it with me 24/7. I slept with it next to me, or under my pillow or whatever, and I always was armed. There I am again. You can see there, carrying my gun. There's the dog Napoleon that saved my dad's life. Fantastic dog. I got him when I was 12 years old. I remember my dad bought him for me. And there was a special breeder that bred these dogs, a cross between a Neapolitan Bull Mastiff and a Great Dane. And so I called him Napoleon, because he's a Neapolitan Bull Mastiff, Great Dane. Absolutely stunning dog. And this was kind of near the end of his life here, because from the time I was 12 until about 23 or 24, that's when he died, when I was about 23, 24. But he was a fantastic dog. We had a lot of adventures together, and he did save my dad's life, and it was just a stunning animal. Okay, so let's get back to... Okay, here. Sorry, let's get this background moving forward a bit. We've seen all this junk. Okay, so somewhere here. These, by the way, what you see in the background are kind of some of the more informal settlements in Cape Town. You get them dotted all over the country, and that's where, the majority of the poorer people live, because it's very cheap to live there, etc. But they also tend to be a kind of a hub of crime. Places like Diepsloot, for instance. Things have changed somewhat. But yes, I digress. From that point on in my life, things changed. I had to be more aware of what was going on. I had to be more vigilant. I had to make sure that my family and my mother were always safe, and that my friends were always safe, and that you just couldn't take security for granted. You couldn't just pull up to your gate and stop your car and open it. No, you had to open the electric gate from up the road to make sure that you could quickly drive in and then close the gate. We had to hire armed guards. We had all sorts of very interesting situations. And I will tell you one or two more before I get to the Q&A. And in fact, I'm going to tell you a rather interesting one. You see, after I left high school, I still continued to work for my parents on and off. I actually, I must have been, again, 19 or so. I was working for my parents, and I eventually went into a full-time IT career, because I had been doing that sort of on and off. I'd been freelancing and working for internet companies and so on. But there was a lull where I stopped working at about the age of 18 or so, 18 and a half, 19. And I worked for my parents for about a year, I think it is. And then I got back into the IT stuff full-time. So I was working for my parents, and there were some new labor laws that just came out in South Africa. Now, the new labor laws meant that there would be more protection for the staff, meant they would get more time off, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But there was something negative about it. I think that they would work less hours or something. I can't remember now. It was so long ago. But the labor lawyer came to bring all the documents and so on. They did like a big conference with the staff to tell them exactly what was going to happen and so on. And then I think it's a week or so later, all the guys were ready to go. And what would happen is I would meet them outside. We'd hop in one of the work trucks, and I'd drive everybody out to the work site, and then we'd get to work and do what we had to do. But in the morning, my parents gave me like a bunch of the contracts and said, can you just go outside and ask the guys to sign the contract, before you guys go to work, go on site. So fair enough. Grabbed the contracts and walked outside and called one of the guys that I knew well over first, and explained to him, you guys need to sign. So he took the thing, and he kind of went and walked into the crowd of all the guys there. There must have been about, 15, 20 of them there. And I guess they were very unhappy with the idea of signing the contract. And all of a sudden they turned. And I don't know how to explain this to you, but in Africa, there's this kind of tribal mentality, this mob mentality that can kick in. And it's horrendous when it happens. And you can look it up online, what happens when this mob mentality, like people get whipped into a fervor. And this is usually where they stone people to death, set them on fire, things like that in the townships when someone's accused of doing a crime or someone's accused of being a witch or, something along those lines. It in an instant, everybody this mob turns into this murderous mob that can do the most atrocious things. And it happened. Obviously, something about the contract triggered them and things were just getting out of hand. They all sort of turned on me and they all came in this big mob and they were angry and they're ready to do something and I didn't know what was going on. So I screamed at them and shouted at them and backed off and took my gun and was ready to do something, screaming at them. And because I did that, some of the other staff members that were in the office nearby, they heard me and they came out. And because a bunch of them came out and everybody was armed, it calmed down. But this is just the beginning of what happened because this got crazy. And this is another murder that I missed, by the way. Because of this new, and it's all related. That calmed down, by the way, and then they did eventually, I think they eventually postponed signing it or whatever, and they decided to bring in the lawyer. I can't remember exactly, but what happened from that point on was things kind of went back to normal for a little while. And I thought everything's cool. But what they had done is secretly a bunch of the staff members had planned together. And what they had planned was they planned to kill the family. They decided this is what they're going to do. They're going to kill my dad and my mom and everybody, and then they would take over the business and run the business. This was what they had planned, you see. So the reason we found out about this is kind of interesting. A bunch of the staff members pooled money together and they paid some hitmen in the local township. They'd paid half, like the upfront, and then they'd pay the rest when the family was dead. And the reason my father found out about this was one morning, one of the staff members just kind of came under attack by the others. Because, all the staff members would gather in the morning and they'd kind of get ready and then we'd go out, do work on site. And one of these guys, and I can't remember his name now, but he somehow had pissed off the other guys and that mob mentality thing kicked in. And they were trying to kill him with shovels and stuff. They were trying to basically kill him. And my dad stepped in and saved him from the mob and said, look, okay, you don't need to go on site today. You're not going anywhere with these guys. You can stay on the property and you can work here and do a couple of things around the property. And because my dad had saved him, he confided in my dad and said, hey, listen, they're planning this thing to kill the family. So this was an interesting situation because we had to find out what the deal was. And there's this very interesting, you can look them up online, this interesting, it's like a security company. It's called Mapocho. Mapocho Amathamaga is what it's called. And they use like a tiger for their logo. And it's kind of like a mafia vigilante, I don't really know, security company. And they operate out of the townships. And what you do is you hire them because that's one thing about these townships that you get, especially near where we were living, Deep Slurt, and there was one next to Danefern there. And I don't know, I've been into them and you drive past them sometimes, but they're not formal. So you don't have addresses, right? So you can't say I live in number 1, like shack number 3 in Deep Slurt or something like that. It's just a big hodgepodge of, people build their own little shelters and shacks and they live there. Many people don't have ID, we have an ID book, used to have an ID book in South Africa. Most people don't have legitimate IDs, a lot of illegal immigrants, a lot of people that you don't know who they are or where they're from. So that's why the crime is so difficult to fight. Because what will happen is a criminal will go do his crime and return to his shack, but nobody will be able to identify him because he's not a real person. He doesn't have a real address. He doesn't have an ID book or anything like that. So it's very difficult to find criminals inside of the townships. But Mapocho, which is kind of like this mafia organization, They know exactly how to find people inside the townships because that's what they do. They're like a mafia and they control the townships and they really rule them in a terrible way. They're awful people. But you can pay them and they'll go find someone and they'll take care of them. And by take care of them, I mean take care of them. You know, either get rid of them or bring them to you or whatever. You just pay them. They're a ruthless bunch. And you can look them up online and you'll find out, and you can try to see, there are a couple of documentaries talking about them, but in real life I've seen them operate. So what happened was my parents hired Mapocho as our new security company. You see, private security in South Africa is one of the most highest paid industries in South Africa because the police are useless and the whole country is pretty much descended into a kind of a chaos where you cannot rely on any kind of government help. The post office is useless. You know, you don't get your post, it gets stolen, things like that. The police are useless. If you call them, they may not turn up ever. If they do turn up, it's always too late. And when they turn up, they don't really help. I've got stories about that too. So they hired Mapocho as our security company. You know, you get the big names like ADT and all this, and they put those little badges, and they've got armed response, and they've got medical response and all that, because that's necessary in South Africa. There's a lot of murder and rape and things like that. So when there's a home invasion, if you press your panic button, by the time they get there, they have to be able to try to resuscitate you if you've been shot or stabbed or whatever it is. And they need to provide medical assistance to rape victims and whatever else. But now Mapocho are also a security company, and they put up those signs with the tigers. And I tell you what, that's a big deterrent, because the criminals in the township know that if they mess with Mapocho, they can get into some serious trouble. These other ADT and whatever, it's whatever, they'll never catch them. So they hired Mapocho to be the security company for the property, okay, and for the business. And then they got Mapocho to round up all the guys to try and find out what was going on with this plot, because, you know, the plot had been exposed. But of course, none of the staff were talking. You couldn't say like, hey, what's going on? And I was there, and it's the most bizarre thing that I've seen in a very long time. So Mapocho turned up in a minibus taxi type thing, right? So they pull up there. It's got their logo on it. And out comes this like very strong, massive, muscular man and a bunch of others. And this big fat mama, okay? This huge fat mama comes out of there too. And what they did was they spoke to the staff for about a minute. And within a minute, they all confessed and pointed out who the ringleaders were, who had kind of decided to put the hit on my family. And they I remember this very clearly. They lined them up against a work truck that we had there. Lined them all up. And they said, now we're going to give you water medicine. And I didn't understand what water medicine was. Of course, I found out what water medicine is. But they took... At first, I didn't really know what was going to happen here, because you got these really big, strong guys, and like I said, this big fat mama. What they did was they took a bucket of water, filled up with water, and they took a sjambok. Now, a sjambok is this big leather whip that you get in South Africa. It's kind of leather or made out of a kind of a rubber or something. It's huge. It's as tall as a man, okay? And you whack things with it, and it's probably the most painful thing that you can get hit with at all. And they got one of the guys, and they stuck his head in the water, and they whipped him, like, really hard. But they didn't use the big muscle guy to whip him. They got the fat mama to do it, because in African tradition, for a woman to hit a man is very... what can I say? Embarrassing. It's like, it's unheard of. It's not something that can be done, but they do it on purpose to humiliating. That's the word I was looking for. So this big mama comes, and one of the other guys is holding the guy's head in a bucket and smacks this guy. So that, of course, Reflex breathes in the water, almost, dies from drowning type thing. And that was to get him to confess, and he confessed. And I was watching this. It's bizarre. The next thing, one of the guys, they line the other guys up, and they're just going to punish them now. So they whip the crap out of these guys, and these guys are really just like, if you get hit with a sjambok, I don't care how hard you're going to feel this. So they whip these guys kind of one by one until they're like basically rolling around on the ground, and then they say, okay, you can go back, get back in line type thing. But one guy, he was trying to be a tough guy. I remember him very clearly. I can't remember his name. But they whacked him, and you could see he really, because they're hitting them on the ass or whatever, you could see that he was feeling pain, but he pretended he didn't. So he just stood there kind of smiling as if nothing was okay. And this fat mama was smacking him with a sjambok. And so about three or four hits and nothing. So she called over that big muscular guy, and he took the sjambok, and he hit the guy so hard that he jumped over the work truck from the force and the pain of this thing. I'll never forget seeing this, okay? Anyway, at the end of the day, it was resolved, and believe it or not, the staff members that had plotted to kill us and had all put in money and stuff still continued to work for my old man and work for the company, most of them. Some of them just disappeared. I don't know what happened to them. They disappeared. Maybe Mapocho took them out. I don't really know. But one thing that was very interesting that we found out was, although there'd been a hit on the family, they wanted to kill my mother, my father, and my sister. But they didn't want me killed. And I think the reason is because I was working with them all the time. We were friends, and they probably thought that they just wouldn't kill me because they liked me or something like that. So that's the second time I narrowly escaped murder. In fact, my entire family narrowly escaped murder. And I have many more stories along these lines, but I thought I'd just share that one with you here because it's probably something you won't experience yourself. I need your help, okay? I've been working on a plan to try and get my parents out of South Africa. Okay. It's very difficult, especially at their age, to get them out. They're in their early 60s. And getting out of mid-60s, I should say, something like that. To get out of South Africa is a tough thing to do. I've been working on a plan which might work, might not work, we never know, to try and get them out, but it's difficult for people to start a new life. What I did was a couple of years ago, when my parents visited me in America, is I filmed a bunch of my dad's stories and I put them up on a YouTube channel. And these are the stories that I grew up with. Instead of having bedtime stories, my dad didn't read me from a bedtime story from a book. He used to come and sit down in my room, my sister as well. And he would tell us some of his adventures growing up in Africa. Because, my dad's a bit of a wild man. He used to hang out in the bush and go and catch snakes and, have encounters with crocodiles and lions and all this other sort of thing. And he'd go off on these bush adventures. That was his thing, is he'd go camping in the middle of the bush and go to catch snakes and things. So he's had a lot of interesting adventures. So I thought, why not film some of these? And, other people could hear these too, because they're fantastic. Some of the stories I lived through myself. And they are really great adventure stories of Africa. So I put them up. There's a website. There's a link in the description. His channel is called Surviving Africa. And I'm hoping to build it to a point where it can start to earn a little bit of money and help them with potentially getting out of South Africa in the future. I know that's a bit of a pipe dream, but it's something that could help. So it's recently, because of a lot of my followers, I recently kind of advertised it, and it's almost at 10,000 subscribers. If you could do me a favor and head on over and just subscribe to it, it would help immensely. I would really appreciate it. And there are a lot of interesting stories. I think you'll enjoy them, and there'll be more stories coming in the future. So don't worry, there'll be kind of probably weekly or bi-weekly stories coming on there. And they are fun. And you can probably get a bit of an idea where I come from, some of the adventures and things like that. So if you don't mind going and subscribing to that, I would absolutely appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.